If you're either a newbie or a casual Rolling Stones fan and want to pick up a few of their albums but don't know where to start, well, keep watching because I'm going to share with you the 5 best albums you should start with. You may have noticed by now that the Stones have a huge catalog, and it can be kind of overwhelming to wade through it. I'm not going to go from best to worst or worst to best on this list. Keith probably wouldn't like that. But instead, I'm just going to go chronologically. I think there's something to be gained from seeing the trajectory of the band over the years. So anyway, let's start. Okay, first up, we got to go with Let It Bleed. Man, this album is a stunner. If you don't know the album, you definitely know the songs. We're talking songs like Give Me Shelter, You Can't Always Get What You Want. These are 2 of the Stones' most popular songs ever. As a whole, the album is pretty raw and actually kind of dark. It really is a snapshot of just the turbulent 60s and all the craziness that was happening at the time. Plus, it also was a dark time for the band. They had just lost Brian Jones, who was a major force in the band. So the album is really wrapped up in a lot of kind of dark stuff, which is sort of its appeal. So with that said, the Stones are kind of going through one of many transitions in their career. In fact, as we go through their career, you'll notice that that's a repeating trend in their career, is their constant changing and evolving and adapting to new situations. Every time the universe throws something at them, they punch back and they always persevere, which is one of their best qualities as a band, and you'll see that as we continue on. So with Brian Jones gone, we see the entrance of Mick Taylor on guitar. This is often called the Mick Taylor period because he appears on a few of the albums from here on out. Mick Taylor was an impeccable guitar player. He had an amazing ability to provide some of the most fluid and gliding lead lines you could ever hear on a piece of music. Often underrated amongst the classic rock circles, I would say. It's sort of around this time where Keith and Mick Taylor kind of created this dual guitar attack from both sides. They were sort of framing the music with guitars, which meant that they were flipping between lead and rhythm work between each other. That would require a lot of listening, which is one of the great things about listening to the Stones' music, is that you can tell they're listening to each other. From a sonic standpoint, Let It Bleed is one of my favorite sounding Stones albums. It really has this warm, rich, full sound that is just irresistible to listen to. It's beautifully recorded by Glyn Johns, who, as you know, worked with the Beatles on a lot of their later albums. But it's just an album that you could feel great about cranking. It doesn't hurt your ears. I mean, look what it says right on in the album. This record should be played loud. So, I mean, what does that tell you? So, like I said, the crowning achievement of this album is Give Me Shelter, which is just a powerhouse song. Even 50 years later, I still feel the same exact spookiness and power that this song had when I first heard it. It's got some wonderful guitar parts, which all is taken care of by Keith. In fact, on many of the songs on this album, it's Keith taking the guitar responsibilities. And it starts off with that hauntingly eerie intro by Keith, which is in standard tuning. And it's really such a tease to the impending doom that's coming in the next few minutes. Everyone in the band sounds spot on this. Jagger's vocals are right in the pocket. And a great surprise with his contribution on the harp on this track. On the surface, you wouldn't necessarily identify it as a harp, but it's just presented in such a smooth and full-bodied way that it's really pleasant to the ear. And it's really a nice little icing on the cake is that harp part. Every drummer I've played with adores Charlie's parts on this song. Those Tom's hits as he's going from the verses to the chorus and vice versa, I mean, they're epic. I mean, it's such a signature piece for him. He sounds fantastic on this song. But as you know, the song reaches the stratosphere when we get to the Mary Clayton part. Her performance during that bridge section is really, mind-blowing, an unforgettable performance. And sure, the song on paper isn't the most complicated composition ever, but typical with the Stones, it's not about what's written. They're all about what you can't write, which is about feel and a vibe. And this song has a vibe. It's just intense and, just as appropriate today as it was then. So, give it a deep listen because it's a powerhouse song. We've got Live With Me, Monkey Man, which have 2 of the most superb Jagger lyrics that he's written. Very 60s, very Bob Dylan, very quirky wordplay and very vivid imagery. It's really fun to listen to. Speaking of Monkey Man has one of the best intros ever. That very provocative bass and piano combination, which is so intriguing and mysterious, and great atmosphere on that. I can put that on repeat constantly. The song itself is a trip. It's one of Keith's most interesting riffs, another one in standard tuning. And it's got a weird stretch on there, which is kind of surprising, and it's kind of fun to play. But yeah, another sleeper gem on that one is Monkey Man. Plus, the album has what I consider to be the best Rolling Stones song ever. I can talk about this song for hours. I won't right now. I'll save it for another video. So the album itself is a stunner. You know, it's an absolute heavyweight of an album and really should be part of any music fan's collection. Okay, next up we have Sticky Fingers. And some people often consider this to be the quintessential Stones album, which they're not wrong. I mean, it's a tight, solid album. The biggest song on here is the amazing and canceled Brown Sugar. What's interesting about this song was that Mick actually wrote the song. On the surface, it gives the impression that Keith wrote it, or it's his riff. It's got that classic open G tuning guitar riff, but it's actually Mick who came up with it. Although on the recording, it is Keith who plays that guitar part. Can't talk about Sticky Fingers without mentioning Can't You Hear Me Knocking, which I'm always surprised this song isn't mentioned more on this in the same breath as like a Jumpin' Jack Flash or a Satisfaction, because this song is one of their most special songs. First of all, the guitar part on this is one of Keith's most interesting, dynamic, and badass riffs ever put to tape. Him slashing away at those chords and playing with the rhythm and accenting in certain spots and getting in front and behind the beat. It's classic Keith, where you don't know where he's going, but you're so drawn to his guitar because it's so dynamic and exciting. So that alone makes it a fun track. But we all know that the centerpiece of the song is really the jam that happens right in the middle towards the end. It starts off with that fantastic sax solo by Bobby Keys, and then it goes into this epic, majestic solo by Mick Taylor. It's one of those moments where you're listening to it and you're just on this ride, and you're locked in and you just don't want it to end. The song takes its time, but hopefully you've got nothing else to do, so sit back and relax. It's a great headphones track to listen to. Another classic, Wild Horses. I mean, this is one of their biggest and most loved ballads. It's a fantastic moment in the album because it really showcases a fantastic guitar work and also some amazing harmony vocals between Mick Jagger and Keith Richards. I mean, no one ever talks about the Jagger-Richards blend, but it's there, and they shine especially on country tracks. They can lock in on that tone and on that timbre so perfectly that they're just made for it, just like they're made for the blues. They're made for singing country songs. The song really is a guitar fest. If it's got acoustic guitars, it's got 12 strings, and it's got electric guitars. It's a really tight, sweet production on this, and it's one of their classic songs. Another sleeper gem on this is the magnificent Moonlight Mile, which really is one of the Stones' most gorgeous productions. It's a sweet acoustic track, but also has strings on it, and Mick Taylor's gorgeous lead at the end is really entrancing. You're really in this kind of haze. It's really a trip and a fantastic way to end the album. So you're going to soon notice that a lot of Stones albums really blend a lot of genres, a lot of styles under one roof. It's really one of their best attributes, is that they can do that. And Sticky Fingers absolutely does that. It blends rock and country and blues, and it sort of all just bleeds together. All in all, the album is super focused, super concise, and just solid from top to bottom. Okay, this one's a cliche, but it's really a no-brainer, Exile on Main Street. I mean, every list in the universe has this album somewhere on the best albums of all time. And, you know, they're not wrong. It's a jam-packed double album that just crams in so many styles and so many textures. It's really a trip. In fact, it's a great road trip album to put on. It's got a great momentum and a great energy throughout that really pulls you through the entire album. For a double album, it goes by very quickly. What's great about this album for me is that the songs run the gamut of the best of American roots music and all that the Stones love about it. They're really continuing what they've done on previous albums, celebrating the blues and country, but they're introducing a new flavor on this album by putting in some gospel in it. You're going to hear that a lot in a lot of the background vocals on a lot of the tracks, that there's this infused gospel feel added to a lot of the music now. I mean, there's so many essential tracks on this. You've got Rocks Off and Tumblin' Dice and Happy and Shine a Light. I mean, it just goes on and on. One of the highlights on this album is really Jagger's lyrics. He really kicks it up a notch and really creates a universe in this album that is extremely unique and special. The album itself is sort of like a novel. There are layers to it. There's different levels of listening here that provide you some interesting aspects to the stories. What I love about this album is that it really keeps you on your toes. You really can't get too comfortable, because once you do, the next song throws you for a loop, and you're constantly being lured further and further, deeper and deeper into the album, and next thing you know, it's over, and it's a fun trip. You know, once again, the Stones are creating this kind of kaleidoscope of sounds and textures, again running the gamut of all these different genres, and that's what makes the album fun. The album might suffer from overhype, but hey, all the hype is real. It's a fantastic piece of art and really a jewel in their crown. In a nutshell, Exile is their masterpiece, and no list is complete without it. Okay, here we go. Next up, Some Girls. This is getting into my favorite era of the band. Remember, I was saying earlier that one of the Stones' best attributes is their constant willingness to kind of push forward regardless of the difficulties that might be happening. Well, this is one of those moments again. This is definitely a transitional period for the band, and seeing them roll with the punches and rising to the occasion is actually pretty special. You have to think about the context of this. I mean, by this point, the band is almost 15 years old. I mean, they had a lot going against them. This was a moment for the Stones to come back, and they came back big. For some extra context here, this is the first album on this list that features Ronnie Wood. Ronnie had replaced Mick Taylor some years back, and again, the whole vibe of the band kind of adjusts to Ronnie being now part of the fold. Ronnie brings in this very fun kind of party atmosphere to the band that kind of stays with the band from that point on. As a guitar player, he can do it all as well. He's a fantastic rhythm player. He came from the band The Faces, and you know, anyone who knows that band knows how of a tight guitar player he was there. But here he bounces off keys so well. And on this album, you can really hear the great interplay between them, and you can hear that on songs like Beast of Burden, for example. So what makes this album kind of special is how the songs came together. Jagger had been living in New York City for some time during this period, so he was kind of soaking up all the music and all the flavors that were going on in the city. So he was kind of exposed to punk that was kind of coming up in the city, and exposed to disco that was also rising in popularity. So all that stuff was seeping in, and then it came out in the writing. And in this album, you really have a nice, fantastic array of styles that you wouldn't necessarily think works on paper, but sonically it does, and they make it work. And on this album, we have some punk, disco, country, a little soul R&B. It, again, runs the gamut. The highlight on this album for me is really Miss You, which is one of their most superb, precise productions that they've ever put together. It's super tight and still accessible even to modern ears. Fantastic bass part by Bill Wyman, which is classic in the disco sense, but still restrained and doesn't really self-indulge in a lot of the disco tropes. It's just the right amount to give it this kind of fresh, new energy to the music, but it's so on point. A lot of people dismiss the song because it's disco. I mean, production-wise, sure, it's leaning towards disco, but to me, it's always been a blues song buried underneath a disco kind of top layer. You know, it's a very guitar song, you know, and a lot of disco songs aren't. So again, this is just another example of the Stones taking a genre and repurposing it for their needs. That was always their strength. What I love about this album is that it offers a lot of great characters for Mick. He plays so many different quirky characters on this album. He's playing the seductive guy on Miss You. He's playing the, you know, in-your-face punk guy on all the punk songs like When the Whip Comes Down or Lies or Respectable. Then he can play the kind of romantic in Beast of Burden, kind of vulnerable, you know. And then he plays the eccentric and a little bit quirky, wacky character on Shattered, which is another great track because it's a little bit like a David Byrne kind of performance. It's so off the wall. You know, life's just a cocktail party on the street, Big Apple. Listen to that song and focus on Mick. Every inflection is so on point and so calculated, and it's really fun. I mean, it's one of my favorite Mick Jagger performances. I mentioned Beast of Burden earlier. It's another one of their biggest songs ever. Great collaboration here between Keith and Mick. I believe it was mainly a Keith melody, definitely his riff, and working together with Mick, they finished the song together. But it's a classic song, apparently, according to Keith, sort of an impression of a Curtis Mayfield kind of vibe, which you can kind of pick up on. But again, they're borrowing and taking these flavors and repurposing them, and it's fascinating and very, very fun. Also, great demonstration of the great interplay between Keith and Ronnie. Best examples of what they call what Keith calls the ancient form of weaving, where the guitars are kind of swirling back and forth, and you're kind of in this trance between the two guitars. It's really one of the signature styles and markings of the Stones, is how the guitars kind of mesh together. Another fan favorite on here is Faraway Eyes, which is, like I mentioned earlier, is another great character for Mick. He puts on his cowboy hat and puts on that great country drawl. And again, features some fantastic tight harmonies between Mick and Keith on this one. They really nail down that country vibe on this. And Ronnie contributes some fantastic pedal steel on here. Everyone in the band sounds fantastic on this one. I've always said that the Stones were a combination of the heart and the hips. Their music gets you moving, gets you grooving, and this album does that. I think it's a great party album. It's a classic from top to bottom as well, so definitely needs to be on this list. And finally, we have Tattoo You, classic album, 1981, a few years after Some Girls, and gotta have it on the list because it's probably one of their best later albums. What makes this album a little bit special is that a lot of the songs came from previous sessions, previous albums. For example, the song Tops on this album comes from the Exile on Main Street sessions, as well as Waiting on a Friend, and some songs came from the Black and Blue album and Goat's Head Soup. So it's really working of unfinished songs from those periods. A lot of people like to argue that this album isn't really a real album because it comes from older sessions. I don't really subscribe to this. Sure, a lot of the basic tracks came from previous sessions, but a lot of work went into finishing the album, mainly by Mick. He had to write lyrics for a bunch of songs and work tirelessly on the vocals for weeks. So if you don't consider it an album, that's your prerogative. Whatever it is fantastic. And so with that in mind, it has to be on a list like this. What's pretty cool about this album is that the album is sort of divided into two sides. The first side is sort of like the rocker, upbeat, heavy songs. And then the flip side, side B, is kind of the dreamier, more ballad-heavy side, which is a great trip to go on when you're listening to the album in one sitting. Does anyone do that anymore? The Stones, again, kick off this album with a monster track. The very popular and probably cliche at this point, Start Me Up. I mean, obviously, this song's been overplayed. I beg of you to try to listen to this song with fresh ears, because for me, this is one of Mick Jagger's best vocal performances ever. Every utterance is impeccable. It is on point. Every vowel is elongated just right. Every consonant is hit right in the pocket. Focus and give his vocal a deep listen, because it's really a remarkable performance and one of the band's best moments. Everyone in the band sounds great. Keith's tone is super tight. Charlie and Bill Wyman are locked in, and the secret sauce of the song is Bill Wyman. His bass part is really eccentric and very, very original, extremely dynamic, fantastic going from the verse into the chorus. Really a great lesson in listening and dynamics in a band, and a fantastic production. I mean, it's hard to listen to that song and listen to it with fresh ears, but it'll catch you by surprise. Worried About You is one of my favorites because it's another example of Mick putting on a different mask. He is really a chameleon when it comes to performing. On this track, he performs most of it in a falsetto voice, which is so intriguing and so gentle you know, it's really a fascinating vocal and extremely fun. And again, it builds to a great crescendo and really a nice, cool soul kind of romantic ballad. And again, this is one of my favorite sounding Stones albums. This one has a fantastic mix on it. It's very crisp and very direct, very punchy, but again, easy on the ears and really, really fun to crank, and a great one to put in the car. Great one to have at a party. Another great party album. Stones have a lot of great party albums. And that's it. Those are the 5 best albums to start with. I should probably mention something about Beggars Banquet. Most people would include Beggars Banquet on a list like this. I can't disagree. It's a fantastic album and another iconic album that you should probably look into. But it's my list, and I needed to include other albums to make it a bit more well-rounded. So nevertheless, it should be noted. Anyway, so that's the list. Thanks for hanging with me. Do you agree? Do you disagree? You probably disagree. Great. Leave a comment. Let's talk about it. See you next time.